The sauna door hissed shut, sealing us in a cocoon of heat and silence. And I felt his gaze before I saw Ito weight heavier than the steam pressing against my skin. My heart pounded, not from the 180-degree air, but from the man sitting 2 feet away. His presence a quiet storm I couldn't escape. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not with him. Not like this. My name is Ethan Caldwell, a 23-year-old barista scraping by in the sleepy town of Millwood, Pennsylvania, where everyone knows your business before you do. I'd come to the gym to clear my head after a fight with my boyfriend, Caleb, whose text still burned unread on my phone. Caleb, with his sharp jawline and sharper temper, was the son of the man now sitting beside me, Richard Harper, the town's revered high school football coach, a man whose broad shoulders and steady voice commanded respect, a man who, until 10 minutes ago, I'd only known as Caleb's dad. The gym was a relic, all chipped tiles and flickering fluorescence, the kind of place where locals gathered not just to work out, but to gossip. I joined a month ago, mostly to avoid Caleb's endless arguments about my lack of ambition. Tonight, I'd lingered too long on the treadmill, chasing the burn in my legs to drown out the ache in my chest. The sauna was an afterthought, a place to sweat out my frustration. I hadn't expected anyone else to be here at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, least of all Richard. He'd walked in, towel slung low on his hips, his frame filling the doorway like he owned the space. "Ethan," he'd said, his voice low, almost surprised, as if he hadn't expected to see me either. I nodded, my throat tight, and we sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the heat wrapping us in its suffocating embrace. I kept my eyes on the floor, counting the grains in the wood, trying to ignore the way his knee brushed mine when he shifted. "You okay, kid?" Richard's voice broke the quiet, rough but gentle, like he was talking to one of his players after a bad game. I glanced up, and his eyes deep brown, flecked with gold, locked onto mine. There was something in them I couldn't read, something that made my pulse spike. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just needed to clear my head." He nodded, leaning back, his arms stretching along the bench behind me. The movement was casual, but it felt deliberate, like he was testing the air between us. "Caleb giving you trouble?" he asked, and there it was, the elephant in the room. His son, my boyfriend. The reason this moment felt like walking a tightrope. I swallowed, my mouth dry despite the humidity. "We had a fight. Nothing new." I tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. Caleb and I had been together for a year. A relationship built on passion but fraying under the weight of his expectations and my insecurities. He wanted me to be someone I wasn't, someone driven, someone who fit into his perfect vision of a future. I just wanted to be enough. Richard didn't push, but his silence was louder than words. He shifted again, closer this time, his thigh grazing mine. The contact sent a jolt through me, electric and wrong. I should have moved away. I didn't. "Sometimes," he said, his voice softer now, "you gotta step back to see what's really in front of you." His words hung heavy, layered with meaning I wasn't ready to unpack. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the lines etched into his face. The weight of years spent being the town's pillar, the perfect father, the perfect man. But there was a crack in that facade, a flicker of something raw and unguarded. The steam thickened, blurring the edges of the room, and I felt the world shrink to just the two of us. My phone buzzed in my gym bag. Probably Caleb, but I ignored it. Richard's hand moved, resting on the bench so close to my shoulder I could feel the heat of his skin. My breath hitched, and I hated myself for it. "Why are you here, Richard?" I asked, my voice bolder than I felt. I needed to know if this was just my imagination, if I was reading too much into the way his eyes lingered. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his head bowed like he was praying. "I don't know, Ethan," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "But I'm here." The words hit like a punch, and I knew we were standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could ruin us both. I thought of Caleb, of the town, of the life I'd been trying to build. But in that moment, with the heat pressing in and Richard's presence pulling me closer, none of it mattered. His hand brushed mine, a fleeting touch that felt like a confession. I froze, my heart hammering, torn between running and staying. And then, without a word, he leaned in, his shoulder pressing against mine. And I let him. I let him because, God help me, I wanted to. The sauna's heat was a living thing, wrapping us tighter with every second. But it was Richard's touch that burned. His shoulder against mine wasn't an accident, Anna Maria, it was a choice. And I was making one too by not pulling away. My mind screamed at me to move, to leave, to remember Caleb. But my body stayed rooted, betraying me with every heartbeat. I glanced at Richard, his profile sharp against the dim glow of the sauna's single bulb. He was staring at the opposite wall, but his jaw was tight, like he was wrestling with something inside. I knew that feeling. I'd spent years hiding who I was in this town, smiling through the whispers about the gay kid at the coffee shop. Coming out at 19 hadn't been bravado, was survival, a way to stop suffocating under the weight of secrets. But this, sitting here with my boyfriend's father, was a different kind of secret, one that could destroy more than just me. Ethan, Richard said, his voice low, almost a growl. You don't have to say anything, but I need you to know, this isn't easy for me either. His words were careful, measured, but they carried a weight that made my chest ache. He wasn't just talking about the moment. He was talking about himself, about the life he'd built, husband, father, coach in the cracks he was letting me see. I wanted to ask what he meant, but my throat was too tight. Instead, I shifted, my knee brushing his again, and this time, he didn't move away. His hand found mine, not holding but resting there, his fingers warm and rough against my skin. It was the kind of touch that asked a question, and I didn't know how to answer. I shouldn't be here, I whispered, more to myself than to him. But he heard it, and his fingers tightened, just enough to keep me from pulling away. Then why are you? He asked, turning to face me. His eyes were searching, not accusing, and I saw something in them I hadn't expected: fear. Richard Harper, the man who'd led Millwood High to 3 state championships, was scared. Of me. Of this. I didn't have an answer, not one that made sense. I thought of Caleb, his anger, his demands, the way he made me feel small. I thought of the nights I'd spent wondering if I was enough, if I'd ever be enough. And here was Richard, looking at me like I was more than enough, like I was something worth risking everything for. The sauna door creaked open, and we both flinched, our hands jerking apart. A middle-aged guy in a towel shuffled in, nodding vaguely before settling on the far bench. The moment shattered, but the tension lingered, humming between us like a live wire. I stood, grabbing my bag, my skin prickling with guilt and something else I didn't want to name. I need to go, I muttered, avoiding Richard's eyes. He didn't stop me, but as I pushed through the door, I felt his gaze on my back, heavy and unspoken. Outside, the gym's cold air hit me like a slap. I checked my phone, 3 missed calls from Caleb, a string of texts demanding to know where I was. I shoved it in my pocket and headed for the locker room, my mind a mess of heat and shame. What the hell was I doing? Richard was Caleb's dad. He was married. He was everything I shouldn't want. But as I showered, the water doing nothing to wash away the memory of his touch, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me. Like he saw me, really saw me, in a way Caleb never had. I dried off, dressed, and headed out into the night, the stars sharp above Millwood's quiet streets. My apartment was a 10-minute walk, but I took the long way, needing the cold to clear my head. When I got home, Caleb was there, sitting on my couch like he owned the place. His blonde hair was mussed, his eyes narrow with suspicion. Where were you? He demanded, standing as I closed the door. "Jim," I said, tossing my bag on the floor. "Needed to blow off steam." He stepped closer, his voice sharp. "You didn't answer my texts. What's going on, Ethan?" I wanted to tell him the truth, to spill everything about the sauna, about his dad, about the way my heart was still racing. But I couldn't. Not because I was afraid of his anger, but because I wasn't sure what the truth even was. "Nothing's going on," I said, turning away. "I'm just tired." Caleb grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Don't lie to me. I know you, Ethan. Something's up." I yanked free, my own anger flaring. "Maybe I'm just sick of you acting like I'm the problem all the time." The words came out harsher than I meant, but they felt good, like a release. Caleb's face darkened, and for a moment, I thought he'd hit me. Instead, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. The memory of Richard's hand on mine burned brighter than Caleb's anger. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to forget that sauna, and neither was he. The next morning, Millwood's main street buzzed with its usual rhythm pickup trucks rumbling past, the diner's neon sign flickering, locals nodding hellos. I poured coffee at the daily grind, my hands moving on autopilot. But my mind was still in that sauna, replaying Richard's touch, his words, the way his fear mirrored mine. I hadn't slept. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, felt the weight of what we hadn't said. Caleb hadn't texted since he stormed out, and I didn't reach out either. Our fights were a cycle, his accusations, my apologies, a fragile truce until the next blow-up. But this time felt different. Like something had shifted inside me. I wasn't sure if it was Richard or my own exhaustion, but I was tired of bending to fit Caleb's mold. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up, my heart stuttering. Richard stood there, his navy jacket unzipped, his eyes scanning the shop until they landed on me. He didn't smile, but there was a softness in his expression that made my stomach twist. He ordered a black coffee, his voice steady but low, like he was speaking just to me. When I handed him the cup, our fingers brushed, and I swear the air crackled. "You working all day?" he asked, lingering at the counter. "Till 3, I said, my voice quieter than I meant. A customer behind him cleared their throat, and I forced a smile, stepping back. Richard nodded, like he understood something I hadn't said, and left. But as he walked out, he glanced back, and that look stayed with me, heavy and warm, through every latte I poured. After my shift, I walked to the park, needing air, needing space. Millwood's park was small, just a few benches and a duck pond, but it was quiet. I sat, watching the water ripple, trying to untangle the mess in my head. Richard was 47, married to Ellen, Caleb's mom, for 25 years. He was a father, a coach, a man who'd built a life on being dependable. What was he doing in that sauna? What was I doing? My phone buzzed, and I braced for Caleb's name. Instead, it was a number I didn't recognize. The text was simple: "Meet me at the gym tonight. 9 p.m. We need to talk." My pulse raced, my thumb hovering over the reply button. I should have deleted it, blocked the number, walked away. Instead, I typed, "Okay." The gym was quieter that night. The usual crowd thinned out. I changed quickly, avoiding the mirrors, and headed for the sauna. Richard was already there, alone, his towel draped across his lap, his elbows on his knees. He looked up as I entered, and the air shifted, thick with the weight of what we both knew was coming. "Ethan," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I owe you an apology." I sat across from him, the bench creaking under my weight. For what? For last night. For crossing a line. He rubbed a hand over his face, and I saw the conflict in his eyes, the same one tearing me apart. "I don't know what I'm doing, but I know it's not fair to you." Then why did you text me? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Why are you here? He leaned back, exhaling heavily. Because I can't stop thinking about you. The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through me. I've spent my whole life doing what I'm supposed to. Being the husband, the father, the coach. But when I saw you last night, it was like waking up. I wanted to laugh, to call it crazy, but my throat was too tight. Instead, I said, "You're married. You're Caleb's dad. This can't happen." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "But I don't know how to stop feeling this." The steam curled around us, and I felt the pull again, that dangerous gravity drawing me closer. I stood, needing distance, but my feet didn't move. "What do you want from me, Richard?" He stood too, closing the gap between us. He didn't touch me, but his presence was enough. Overwhelming. "I want to know if you feel it too." I did. God, I did. But admitting it felt like betraying everything Caleb. Myself. The life I was still trying to figure out. I turned away, my hands shaking. "I can't do this." "Then tell me to leave," he said, his voice low, pleading. "Tell me, and I'll go." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stepped closer, my hand brushing his arm, and the world tilted. His breath caught, and for a moment, we just stood there, caught in the space between right and wrong. The sauna door opened, and we sprang apart, my heart pounding. It was just another gym goer, oblivious to the storm we'd stirred. I grabbed my bag and left, the cold air outside a shock to my system. But as I walked home, Richard's words echoed, "I can't stop thinking about you." And I knew, deep down, I couldn't either. The days that followed were a blur of guilt and longing. Each moment split between wanting to forget Richard and craving the next time I'd see him. I avoided the gym, sticking to early shifts at the coffee shop. But Millwood was too small to escape anyone for long. Every corner store, every diner booth, felt like a place where I might run into Heim or worse. Caleb. Caleb hadn't spoken to me since our fight, but his absence didn't feel like freedom. It was a void, filled with questions I couldn't answer. Was I angry at him for pushing me away, or at myself for letting Richard pull me in? I kept my phone face down, ignoring the single text from Richard that I hadn't deleted. "I'm sorry." But I meant what I said. On Friday, the coffee shop was slammed, a rare rush of tourists passing through for a fall festival. I was wiping down the counter when Ellen, Richard's wife, walked in. My stomach dropped. She was a kind woman, mid-40s, with warm eyes and a laugh that made customers linger. She ordered a latte, chatting about the weather, oblivious to the storm she'd walked into. "Ethan, you should come to the game tomorrow," she said, smiling as I handed her the cup. "Richard's got the team fired up. Caleb's starting. You know." I forced a nod, my throat tight. "Yeah, maybe I will." She left, and I leaned against the counter, my hands shaking. The thought of seeing Richard and Caleb in the same place, surrounded by the town's cheering crowd, made me feel like I was drowning. But I went, because avoiding it felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to face. The football field was alive with lights and noise, the stands packed with Millwood's finest. I sat near the back, my hoodie pulled low, watching Caleb sprint across the field, his number 12 jersey a blur. Richard stood on the sidelines, clipboard in hand, his voice booming over the crowd. He was in his element, commanding, confident, but I caught the moment his eyes scanned the stands and found me. His expression didn't change, but I felt Ida pull, a secret shared in plain sight. After the game, a 28-14 win, the crowd spilled onto the field. I hung back, debating whether to leave, when Richard approached, his jacket slung over his shoulder. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice low enough that the crowd's chatter drowned it out. "Ellen invited me," I said, my eyes on the ground. Thought it'd be normal. He laughed. A short, bitter sound. Normal. Right. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. Can we talk? Somewhere private. I knew I should say no, but my feet followed him to the locker rooms back in trance. Away from the crowd. The air was cooler here. The noise muffled. He stopped, turning to face me, and the space between us felt alive. Electric. Ethan, I'm trying to do the right thing, he said, his voice raw. But every time I close my eyes, it's you I see. My breath caught, and I hated how much I wanted to hear those words. You're married, I said, my voice shaking. You have a son. My boyfriend. I know, he said, stepping closer. And I've spent 25 years being what everyone needs me to be. But this, it's the first time I've felt alive in years. His hand reached for mine, and I let it, my fingers curling around his. It was wrong, so wrong, but it felt like the only honest thing I'd done in days. His thumb brushed my knuckles, and I closed my eyes, letting the moment swallow me. Footsteps echoed nearby, and we pulled apart, my heart racing. It was just a janitor, but the interruption was a reminder of how close we were to getting caught. I can't keep doing this, I said, stepping back. I need to figure out what I want. Richard nodded, his eyes heavy with something like grief. I'll wait, he said, as long as it takes. I left, the night air cold against my skin, and walked home, my mind a battlefield. Caleb was waiting at my apartment again, his arms crossed, his eyes hard. Where were you? He demanded. At the game, I said, my voice flat. Saw you play. He stepped closer, his anger softening into something else. I miss you, Ethan. Can we just try again? I looked at him, his familiar face, the one I'd loved for a year, and felt nothing but guilt. I need time, I said, and he nodded, leaving without another word. Alone, I sat on my bed, Richard's words echoing, I'll wait. And I wondered how long I could keep running from what I felt. Time didn't make things clearer, it only sharpened the edges of my confusion. I went through the motions, pouring coffee, smiling at customers, dodging Caleb's texts. But every quiet moment brought Richard's face to mind. His voice, his touch. I was unraveling, caught between loyalty to a relationship that was crumbling and a pull towards something I couldn't name. A week after the game, I broke. I texted Richard, meet me at the park. Midnight. It was reckless, stupid, but I needed answers, even if they hurt. The park was deserted when I arrived, the duck pond reflecting the moon's pale light. Richard was already there, sitting on a bench, his silhouette unmistakable. He stood as I approached, his eyes searching mine. You came, he said, like he hadn't been sure I would. I had to, I admitted, sitting beside him. The night was cold, but his presence was warm, grounding. I can't keep pretending this isn't happening. He nodded, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I've been trying to figure out what this is, he said. All I know is I've never felt this way before. Not with Ellen. Not with anyone. His words hit hard, peeling back layers of denial. You're married, I said again, like a mantra, but it felt weaker every time. And I'm with Caleb. This isn't just about us. I know, he said, his voice breaking. But I've spent my life hiding. I didn't even know what I was hiding from until I met you. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the man behind the coach. The father, the husband, a man who'd buried parts of himself to fit the town's expectations, just like I had. What are we doing, Richard? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He reached for my hand, and this time, I didn't pull away. I don't know, he said, but I don't want to stop. The kiss came before I could think, his lips soft but urgent against mine. It was quick, desperate, and when we pulled apart, I was shaking, Not from the cold, but from the truth we'd just admitted. We sat in silence, the weight of it settling over us, until he spoke again. "I'll tell Ellen," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "Not tonight, but soon. I can't keep living a lie." I wanted to tell him no, to protect the life he'd built, but I couldn't, because I was tired of lying too. "And Caleb?" I asked. He flinched, like the name was a wound. "He'll hate me, but he deserves the truth." We parted ways, promising to talk again, but the kiss lingered, a secret branded on my skin. The next day, Caleb showed up at the coffee shop, his eyes red, like he hadn't slept. "We need to talk," he said, and I knew he sensed something was wrong. We walked to the diner across the street, sitting in a booth that smelled of grease and nostalgia. "What's going on with you, Ethan?" he asked, his voice low. "You're different." I wanted to tell him about his dad, about the park, about the kiss, but the word stuck. Instead, I said, "I don't think I can do this anymore." His face fell, and for the first time, I saw him not as the guy I'd loved, but as someone I'd hurt. "Is there someone else?" he asked, his voice sharp. I hesitated, and that was answer enough. He stood, his chair scraping the floor, and walked out. I didn't follow. I sat there, staring at my coffee, knowing I'd just burned a bridge I couldn't rebuild. That night, I went to the gym, half hoping Richard would be there, half dreading it. He wasn't. But as I sat in the sauna, alone, I realized something. This wasn't just about Richard. It was about me. About choosing a life where I didn't have to hide. I'd spent years shrinking myself to fit Millwood, to fit Caleb. I was done. When I got home, there was a voicemail from Richard. "Ethan," I told Ellen. She needs time. I don't know what's next, but I need to see you. Please." I listened to it 3 times, my heart racing. He'd done it. He'd taken the first step, and now it was my turn. I texted him, "Tomorrow. My place. 8 p.m. I didn't know what I was starting, but I knew I couldn't stop. My apartment felt too small for what was coming. I tidied the cramped living room, moving books and empty coffee mugs, as if order could calm the chaos in my chest. Richard was coming, and with him, the weight of everything we'd done, everything we were about to do. I'd broken up with Caleb. He'd told Ellen. We were free, but it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. At 8 p.m. sharp, Richard knocked. He looked older somehow, his eyes shadowed, his shoulders heavy. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. I nodded, stepping aside. He sat on my couch, his hands clasped, and I sat across from him, the coffee table a fragile barrier. "How's Ellen?" I asked, needing to know. He exhaled, rubbing his neck. "She's hurt. Angry. She asked me to leave for a while, to give her space. I'm staying at the motel by the highway." My stomach twisted. I'd known this was coming, but hearing it made it real. "And Caleb?" "He doesn't know yet," Richard said, his voice tight. "But he will. Ellen won't keep it from him." I nodded, my throat burning. I ended things with him. Yesterday. Richard's eyes met mine, a mix of relief and pain. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't want this to hurt him." "But it will," I said, the truth sharp between us. "And I don't know how to fix that." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Maybe we can't. Maybe all we can do is be honest now." Honesty. It sounded simple, but in Millwood, it was a grenade. I thought of the whispers that would follow, the judgment, the way this town would chew us up. But looking at Richard, his face open and raw, I realized I didn't care. Not enough to stop. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing as marriage. My fears, the lives we'd been trying to live. He told me about the years he'd spent questioning himself, burying feelings he didn't understand. Until that night in the sauna cracked him open. I told him about growing up in Millwood, always feeling like I was too much or not enough, and how his touch had felt like a lifeline. When the clock struck midnight, he stood to leave, but I grabbed his hand. "Stay?" I said, my voice barely audible. He looked at me, his eyes searching, and then he nodded. We didn't sleep together. Not like that. We lay on my bed, fully clothed, his arm around me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt safe. But safety was an illusion, and I knew it. The next morning, Caleb showed up. I was making coffee when he pounded on the door, his face pale with rage. "You're with him, aren't you?" he shouted, pushing past me. Richard was in the living room, and the moment Caleb saw him, the air turned to ice. "Dad." Caleb's voice broke, his eyes darting between us. "What the hell is this?" Richard stepped forward, his hands raised. "Caleb, let me explain." "Explain what?" Caleb yelled, his voice shaking. "That you're screwing my boyfriend." "It's not like that," I said, but Caleb wasn't listening. He lunged at Richard, shoving him against the wall. I grabbed his arm, pulling him back, my heart pounding. "Stop it," I shouted. "Caleb, please." He turned on me, his eyes wild. "You did this. You ruined everything." Richard stepped between us, his voice calm but firm. "Caleb, this is on me, not Ethan." Caleb laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You're both disgusting." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I sank onto the couch, my hands trembling. Richard sat beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "He'll come around," he said, but we both knew it wasn't true. Not yet. The rest of the day was quiet, but the silence was heavy. Richard went back to the motel, promising to call. I stayed in, avoiding the world, knowing the news would spread. By evening, my phone buzzed with texts from friends, co-workers, even customers. "Is it true? You and Coach Harper?" I didn't reply. That night, I lay awake, thinking of Caleb's face, Ellen's pain, the life Richard was leaving behind. I thought of the sauna, where it all began, and wondered if we'd ever find peace. But as I drifted to sleep, I realized something, for the first time. I wasn't hiding, and that was worth something. Millwood didn't forgive easily. By Monday, the whispers had turned to stares, the gossip a living thing that followed me from the coffee shop to the grocery store. I kept my head down, pouring lattes, ignoring the pointed looks from customers who'd once called me by name. Richard's name was on everyone's lips to Coach Harper, the town hero, now the subject of scandal. I hated that I'd helped bring him there, but I couldn't regret him. He came to my apartment that night, his face drawn, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Ellen wants a divorce," he said, sitting heavily on my couch. "She's keeping the house. I'm figuring things out." I sat beside him, my hand finding his. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Not for us, but for the pain we'd caused. For Ellen, for Caleb, for the life we'd upended. "Don't be," he said, his voice firm. "I chose this. I chose you." His words were a lifeline, but they came with a weight. I thought of Caleb, his anger, his hurt. I thought of the town, its judgment like a storm cloud. But looking at Richard, his eyes steady and warm, I knew I'd chosen him too. We spent the next weeks navigating the fallout. Richard moved into a small apartment near the gym, stepping down as coach to avoid the scrutiny. I quit the coffee shop, taking a job at a bookstore in the next town over, where the stairs were fewer. We were careful, keeping our distance in public. But at night, we were together talking, laughing, building something new from the ashes of what we'd broken. Caleb didn't speak to either of us, but I heard from mutual friends that he'd left Millwood, transferring to a college out of state. I hoped he'd find peace, even if he couldn't forgive us. Ellen was quieter, but she sent Richard a letter one day. Short and simple. I hope you find what you're looking for. It was closure. Of a kind. One evening, months later, Richard and I sat in his apartment, the radio playing softly. The town had moved on to new gossip, and we were finding our rhythm, learning to live without hiding. He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my skin, and I felt the weight of the past lift. Just a little. We did something sacred too. You know, he said, his voice low. We chose to be honest. To be us. I nodded, leaning into him. The sauna had been the start. A moment of reckless truth that broke everything and built something new. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was ours. And as I looked at Richard, his face lit by the soft glow of the lamp, I knew we'd keep choosing each other, no matter what came next. The world outside could judge, could whisper, could hate. But in that moment, with his hand in mine, I felt whole. We'd broken something sacred. Yes, but we'd found something sacred too. A love that was worth the cost. A truth that set us free.